In this video, I wanted to talk about the differences between modern day sport bikes and classic bikes. Over the years, I've built up a bit of a reputation for having a love and admiration for older motorcycles. Bikes such as the original CBR 900RR, the RVF 400 and VFR 400, the original CBR 250RR, the Ninja ZX2R, and many more are all fantastic sport bikes, and they all have their names sealed in the sport bike history books forever. But today it's time to take off the bias glasses and really take a deep dive look into these older bikes and compare them to what we have today and see if we really should miss the past, or are we actually better off now? Although there are tons of awesome bikes from the 90s to spotlight in this video, and comparatively there are also a lot of fantastic modern day bikes as well, I've decided to pick one representative from each that fit into the same category and compare the two. And the two bikes I have chosen are the 1994 to 1996 Honda RVF 400 and the current 2024 ZX4RR by Kawasaki. I chose these two bikes for very specific reasons. One, they are both smaller beginner style bikes with similar engine sizes, and two, I've just so happened to have ridden both of them, so I actually have personal experience with each that I can speak on. Back last summer, I rode Kawasaki's ZX4R during a demo day ride event, and back 4 years ago, I had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, thanks to my good friend Justin at Adrenaline Cycle, to ride what I call my dream bike, the RVF 400. And he took me down some really cool windy, twisty roads where I got to really experience what the bike had to offer. Now, even though I didn't come anywhere close to the limitations of either bike, I still got a decent feel of what they were like to ride. So let's first talk about the RVF 400. The RVF 400 by Honda is a 399cc V4 sport bike originally designed and imported from Japan. It was designed in the 90s and it has some trademark features such as gear-driven cams, inverted front forks, a single-sided swing arm, dual rotors and calipers for the front, and just an iconic looking design that has aged exceptionally well. And in the other corner, we have the all-new and modern Kawasaki ZX4RR. Now, what makes this bike so special? First off, it's the only modern sport bike that has a 399cc inline-4 engine that revs to 16,000 RPM. It is an absolute killer bike to ride on the streets. No, it is not as fast as Kawasaki's ZX6R and certainly not their 10R, but it is still a rather quick motorcycle with an impressive top speed of 150 miles per hour. So let's kick off our comparison with the styling. The ZX4RR is not a bad looking bike at all. I love the big center ram air intake right above the headlights, and overall the bike just looks cool. A very well constructed sport bike. Good body lines, kind of conservative overall in their styling, but in general, the KRT color scheme does make it a little bit louder. The front cowl has two large ram air ducts that feed into the airbox, and Kawasaki reminds you with the ram air system stamped into the left side. The gold fork tops are also a nice touch. Overall, nothing too crazy. It looks very on brand for Kawasaki sport bikes, such as their ZX6R. However, the Honda RVF 400 has a completely unique design, and it isn't going to get confused for any other model bike. The RVF, with its iconic two teardrop headlights, wild 90s graphics, and single-sided swing arm, this bike says a lot even when sitting on its kickstand. It also has its own ram air ducts that are fake. Yes, totally useless fake air inducts on a legendary bike. But regardless, it still looks cool and it is part of the look, so fake or not, I like them. As mentioned before, you have this single-sided swing arm which gives you a full view of the beautiful looking rear wheel, and I also like how Honda wraps the exhaust out to the left side of the bike, giving you full view of that rear wheel. Overall, the RVF is just a beautiful bike. It definitely screams classic with the massive tail, but it's still charming, and in my opinion, it is totally a better looking bike than the modern ZX4RR, and it isn't even close. But both are good looking bikes. The RVF just has that timeless look to it. And I know it's love it or hate it, but when you look at other 90s styled bikes, they really do just have that iconic double headlight design, a lot of them do, and there's just something nostalgic about the way they look. Modern day bikes do look nice. They have more of a futuristic and sleek looking design with LED lights, and now with the addition of winglets and aero, they look futuristic. I sometimes like that look, but also I have to admit that I think I prefer the look of the older bikes more. They just have a level of class to them that isn't replicated in today's models. Now, before jumping into the performance category, I want to remind everyone that 30 years separate these two bikes. 30 years of research, improvements in technology, which is an eternity in the motorcycling world. So there is a clear advantage weighing in Kawasaki's favor. However, I just want you to keep that in mind because this little RBF 400 is impressive considering its age. That said, what makes the RBF 400 so impressive? Well, the RBF does make a grand total of 61 horsepower at 12,500 RPM and has a 25.8 foot-pound of torque at 10,000 RPM. Compared to the ZX4RR, which, by the way, we are comparing the non-US model, because I felt that was a little bit more fair considering the RBF 400 was never made in the United States. Anyway, the ZX4RR rivals the RBF 400 with a final output of 76 horsepower at 14,500 RPM and 28.8 foot-pound of torque at 13,000 RPM. The RBF 400 weighs in at a curb weight of 399 pounds, and the ZX4RR comes in at 416 pounds. So the Ninja has the power advantage of 15 horsepower, but the RBF has a weight advantage of 17 pounds. Which means that the RBF 400 has a power to weight ratio of 6.5 pounds per horsepower, and the Ninja has 5.5 pounds per horsepower, making the Ninja the clearly faster bike, which is obvious given that the top speed of the Ninja is 150 miles per hour compared to the RBF's, which is at about 136 miles per hour. The power is actually really interesting because both bikes have unique circumstances working against them. The ZX4RR has modern day technology, which is great, but with that it also has modern day emissions and regulations that choke up the power and add some weight. These stock exhausts on modern day bikes are no joke. They weigh a lot. You can shed nearly 10 pounds just from a new aftermarket exhaust system. Meanwhile, the RBF has the advantages of less regulations. However, it does, as all 90s bikes do, suffer from one major disadvantage, in that it uses carburetors. Now, carbs are not terrible, but fuel injection is way better for ease of use and reliability. I know carbs can be reliable too, but they just require a little bit more attention, and making adjustments on them requires mechanical disassembly, versus with fuel injection, you can plug in a laptop and you can change up the fuel trim tables with the click of a mouse button. It's a major advantage with the Ninja. And moving on from power and fuel delivery, we have suspension and braking. Starting with braking, the RBF has two 270mm front disc brakes with 4 piston standard mounted calipers, compared to the Ninja, which also has 2 front disc brakes, but theirs are larger at 290mm, and it also has 4 piston radial mounted calipers instead of the standard mounted, which is an improvement as well. The Ninja also comes with ABS, and because of the radial mounted orientation of the calipers and the ABS, the Ninja is the clear winner here. As for the suspension, the RBF has 41mm inverted forks with preload and rebound damping, compared to the Ninja, which has 37mm Showa big piston front forks with single preload adjustability. I know fork technology has come a long way since the 90s, which makes me believe the Ninja has the better setup. Knowing Showa makes a solid set of front forks, it's hard for me not to give the nod to the Kawasaki. But the RBF's forks are 4mm bigger and have rebound damping as well. I think this is probably more even across the two bikes, but I'll be the first to admit I'm no suspension expert, so if you are, please feel free to chime down in the comment section below. In my experience when I rode both of these bikes, I felt that the suspension was very similar, so the specs may be better on one versus the other, but in real world riding, I didn't really notice a big difference. Now let's move on to our next category, and that is build quality. First off, I know the build quality of the engine and other mechanical aspects of the RBF 400 is going to be second to none. However, I haven't heard any negative reviews of the ZX4RR's build quality or reliability. For the most part, it just seems like a rather reliable Kawasaki motorcycle. And with that, the Ninja being newer and fuel injected, it's actually less likely to have problems unless the owner of the RBF is completely up to maintenance. It is carbureted, so you might have some issues. One thing I noticed almost immediately when I first saw the RBF in person was the lack of like a front cowling shroud to hide the wires and cables. To me, it just didn't feel like a finished bike in that sense. Now, I know this is no slight to Honda. This is how all bikes were back in the day. But that's sort of my point. When you get to a classic sport bike, it just feels a little less finished and refined. Almost like it's missing some plastics or something. There's just something missing, it looks like. Compare that to the modern day Ninja. All the wires are well hidden and the real ram air intakes going through the side. It just felt like a complete and refined bike. Everything just seemed to fit a little bit better. Also, the way the RBF's fairings were, they just felt like they were starting to show their age a little bit more. And the bodywork, it just felt overall less tight, if that makes any sense. Like, it just seemed like it just didn't really click in like the bodywork on the Ninja did. I know this sounds stupid, but it's something I just noticed. However, one small thing I noticed in Honda's favor was that the RBF's controls and feel seemed a lot nicer and overall better quality. The hands on the grips and the levers, it just felt more sturdy on the Honda versus the Ninja. The Ninja's levers, they feel like the most discount bargain bin crap ever. They were floppy and felt super budget. The RVF had real nice tight tolerances with their levers. I know you can always get aftermarket levers on a Ninja, but I still feel like this was worth mentioning. Overall, I think that both of these bikes have their advantages and disadvantages in this category. So now is the fun part, the riding experience. There is just something so fun about riding a small displacement 4-cylinder bike around. Every single motorcycle enthusiast should try it at least once. It's a really great time. So let's start with the ZX4RR. The riding experience came just as advertised. I loved revving this thing out, and the quick shifter was so much more fun on this little bike than I expected it to be, mainly because of how much you get to use it. It just had such a playfulness to it. It's a brand new bike, and it just felt new and modern and capable, and I was overall just impressed. Everything in the bike felt refined and nice to ride. Unfortunately, I was riding the US spec model, which is capped to like 56 horsepower, and believe me, you felt that flat spot. Right at about 10,000 RPM, just when it's starting to come alive, it just falls straight flat on its face. I think an ECU flash is basically non-negotiable for this bike if you live in the United States. Another thing to note about the ZX4RR was I was riding at a demo day with a group, so I never really got a chance to fully uncork this bike. I was stuck sitting behind people going slower than I wanted to, but I still had a lot of fun. That's one great thing about these little bikes is you can really rev them out even doing the speed limit. So I still had a smile on my face most of that day, but it was still a disappointment I didn't really get a chance to take it down some back roads like I did with the RBF 400. My biggest takeaways about riding this bike was that first, it is insanely too quiet. It needs an exhaust. You can't hear anything. It's like a scooter. It has a really bad flat spot, as noted before, and it just kills the riding experience when you're in the high RPMs, because it's starting to build power, and then just stops. Now, those are the two biggest issues, and both of them can be easily fixed with an ECU flash and a slip-on exhaust, so it's not a really big issue with this bike. I loved the quick shifter, and the TFT display showed so much information. It was super easy to read. It was nice to look at. I really liked the TFT display on the Ninja. I mean, come on, it even has a gear indicator and a fuel gauge. Now let's talk about the Honda RVF 400. Now, at first you will notice that it is kind of a dog at the low RPMs. It has no torque off the line. I mean, probably less than like a Ninja 400. However, quickly after that, I got up in the revs and I was moving, and then the magic started working. The bike just felt so special. And objectively, it was incredible, especially when you consider when this bike came out in the 90s. However, it's much different than the Ninja. We talked about the RBF's carburetors, but one benefit of them is that they give such a mechanical feel. When you twist your wrist using the cable throttle, you can feel the butterfly valves opening, and then you have that sound, the V4 with gear-driven cams roaring behind you as you twist the throttle. The fuel delivery was so smooth, the bike operated like a sewing machine. There were no flat spots at all anywhere. The bike just made power and kept making power as you increased the revs. It was very responsive, free to rev, free to move, free to corner. It was perfect, and every bit of what I had hoped for and so much more with this bike came true. Now, comparing the two bikes, it's kind of hard to compare because you have the V4 motor with the RVF, which is always going to be more special than an inline-4 engine. But the inline-4 engine is still special. It's a small displacement, high revving inline-4, and with that, it made a little bit more power, and I felt like I could notice maybe a little bit more power. It felt like it had so much more. Of course, the flat spot comes in and just kills the party, which just... that's the main thing that's holding this bike back, but I can tell once it's been flashed, it's going to be so much faster than the RVF 400. Now, comparing the two, I have to say in conclusion, the RVF's riding experience was better than the Ninja's. I mean, I can see the potential for the Ninja with some mods, but stock for stock, those two bikes, I would have to go with the RVF. The V4, the gear-driven cams, it's just a more special bike. It was more of a joy to ride. Out of the box, that is the better bike to be on, in my opinion. Now, finally, there are a few things I have to mention. For one, the RVF 400 is an imported bike, which means that there are some things you kind of have to deal with. The gauge cluster is in kilometers, there is no fuel gauge, no gear indicator. It's going to require maintenance and work to keep it going. Parts are going to be harder to find, and it's going to get more and more expensive to fix things as it ages up even more and becomes more rare. Another issue with the RVF 400 is it's not really any cheaper, even though it's a 30-year-old bike at this point. Here in the US, an imported RVF 400 is right around that $10,000 mark for a decent one that's not like a project. And that's if you can even find one. They are rare. The Ninja has a full color TFT display, gear indicator, fuel gauge, riding modes, quick shifter, traction control, ABS, smartphone connectivity, fuel injection, so on and so on. It has so many things in its favor. The Ninja is technologically superior, and owning one is easier than owning an RVF. But to the RVF's credit, if you are a true enthusiast and loves to work on the bike and maintain the bike and upkeep the bike, it is overall, I believe, a more rewarding ownership experience in the long run because you have a special one-off bike. You can take this bike out to a bike meet and nobody is going to have one. You're going to be the only one there. Everybody that knows bikes are going to come up to you and they're going to look at your bike. You're going to have that single-sided swing arm. You're going to have the iconic tiny V4 engine with the gear-driven cams. It is a special bike that draws a crowd. The Ninja's not going to have quite that curb appeal, especially as a brand new bike. And that is how it is with most 90s bikes. Most of them don't have a fuel gauge or a gear indicator. They all have carburetors and they have a raw feeling to them. They all are going to require work and TLC to keep going, versus the new modern bikes are just ready to go out of the box and are easier to live with. In most cases, the most annoying thing with a new bike is just going to be that you have to get a flash to fix the flat spots. But having modern conveniences such as a quick shifter is just so nice to have. And the thing to keep in mind with modern bikes is that they do just a fantastic job at everything. The braking, technology, suspension, all of them are leaps and bounds better than the average 90s bike. So in the beginning of this video, I asked the question to you guys, if we should miss the past, or are we actually better off now? And it's a complicated question because I think it depends on what bike you're comparing. Because the old school bikes have such a unique and special feel to them, especially bikes like the RVF. Some people call it character. All I know is it really hits my nostalgia and makes me miss the 90s. Those old 90s graphics, like there's just something special about seeing a 90s motorcycle. There are definitely faster bikes out today. The modern bikes are getting more and more capable every single year, and objectively modern motorcycles are simply better to own and be around. But there's more to riding than numbers and features. At the end of the day, when you're riding down the road on your motorcycle and you open that throttle and you feel that mechanical feeling of the throttle cable and the butterfly valves, and you hear the growling behind you, whether it's a V4 with gear-driven cams, for example, it's just something that happened once in our history, and it will never be repeated. As time goes on, these bikes are going to get rarer and rarer, and eventually a day will come where people don't ride them at all, very few people at least. So we're going to cherish that time in history while they're still around. So that's it for this video. This was a very fun one for me to make. I hope you guys enjoyed it. My love for motorcycles and especially older bikes can keep me talking all day long, but I know there is only so much time I can put into these videos. I'd like to carry this conversation further in the comment section below. Please let me know, guys, how you feel about modern day sport bikes versus the older ones. What makes an older bike special to you? Do you have that same appreciation for the nostalgia that I do, where I see an older bike? Or are you new age? You don't care about that, you just want the newest, most technologically advanced, more power, just keep pushing those boundaries and getting more and more? Are you more about looking to the future or looking back in the past? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a good one. Take care and bye-bye.
It's a sick news, pull your little arrows out. Let me live my life, the one I'd better lead. All the plans of fantasies, and we looked at them 11 ways. You said, look at me, I looked away, and you wrote the song I wanna